New Zealand is also quite unusual in the trading world. We're one of only 2 countries that export more than half of the food that we produce. And agriculture trade is highly distorted throughout the world. So we are always at risk of being shut out of markets. Our major primary sector across dairy, meat, horticulture, wine, seafood, forestry. At least 75% of the output of those industries is exported. Some of them, kiwi fruit and dairy, it's 95%. So if you take those major pillars of the New Zealand economy, without export markets, without trade, somewhere between 3/4 and 95% of those industries would simply not exist anymore. So that's why successful look to do these free trade agreements so that our exporters, our producers in those industries and our other exporters can get new opportunities offshore, and also to level the playing field with other countries who already have these agreements and otherwise have an advantage over our business people. The other reason that governments have been doing these agreements is to try and ensure that we are diversifying our risk in offshore markets. If you go back 50 years, less than 30%, only about 28% of our export trade was to countries in Asia. Now that is 42% and rising. So our trade is coming closer to us. If you look around the Pacific Rim, one long-haul flight away, 70% of our two-way trade and investment takes place within the Asia-Pacific region. So that's where our FTAs have very much focused on, and the TPP is the latest one of those. TPP, as you'll see from the map there, 12 countries, New Zealand sitting in the middle, spread around the Pacific Rim, the Asia-Pacific region. Those 12 countries comprise a population, a market of 800 million people, combined gross domestic product, $28 trillion, which is around 36% of the entire world economy. 5 of our top 10 export markets are around the TPP table: Australia, United States, Japan, Singapore, and Malaysia. TPP includes the world's #1 economy, United States. Includes the world's #3 economy, Japan. We already have a free trade agreement with the world's #2 economy, China. So if TPP enters into force, New Zealand will have free trade agreements with the top 3 economies in the world. And already, right today, over 40% of our exports of goods and services go to these countries in the TPP. Sean said that this initiative has been going for some time. This slide, to me, captures really what TPP is all about for the initiative, the strategy that New Zealand's been following. Hello. Starting with the that was our bilateral agreement that we had done since the one we did with Australia, obviously our closest and biggest neighbour. We did that in the 80s, but then we didn't do any more of these agreements for 20 odd years. So when we were looking to do another one, we went to next close neighbour, Singapore. And with Singapore, we did that agreement, a very significant agreement at the time, but both of us pretty small, so less than half of the 0.5% of the global economy tied up in that agreement. We both wanted to expand it, so we asked Chile. You might say, why Chile? Well, we looked that way to Singapore, we were looking that way to our neighbour that way, Chile. Chile is also a relatively liberal economy like New Zealand and Singapore. And so after some discussion with them, we ended up doing this agreement that was called the P4 with New Zealand, Singapore, Chile, and Singapore also included Brunei. Another very significant agreement, but still less than 1% of the global economy. The long name for that agreement is the Trans-Pacific Strategic Economic Partnership Agreement, and those words were all descriptive of the agreement. Trans-Pacific, from that side of the Pacific to that side of the Pacific, with New Zealand in the middle. And strategic, because all four of us wanted to expand it. All four of us are members of the APEC grouping, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, that New Zealand hosted that big meeting of in 1999. So we took the P4 to the 21 economies of APEC. These economies comprise the 70% of our trade and investment. And we said, is anybody interested to join us in this? We think it's a pretty good thing we've done here. Everybody scratched their heads and said, well, that's interesting, which is diplomatic talk for no thanks. But actually, a year or so later, in 2006, as Sean said, got a call from the United States saying, this really does look kind of interesting, because we, the United States, have been thinking that we really need to get more involved in the Asia-Pacific region, particularly on our side of the Pacific, in the Asian markets, and can we talk? Long story short, we talked, the four of us, with the United States, and we moved to the point in September 2008, which you remember was the very end of the Bush administration in the United States, and also with the Helen Clark government here, to launch the TPP negotiation. It was launched with 8 countries there. President Obama took a little while to look at it. He eventually we now have the TPP agreement concluded with 36% of the global economy. So we have been, if you like, paddling our waka, driving this initiative with New Zealand at the heart of it, from less than 0.5% of the global economy to now 36% of the global economy in our region, and we want to keep on getting more and more of our partners involved going forward. What does 40% of trade look like? On one side of here are our goods exports. These are the current numbers from 2014 of exports going to the TPP partner countries. $20 billion worth of goods exports spread out across all of our major categories of exports, all the primary categories of exports, and nearly $8 billion worth of manufactured goods as well. On the other side there, you've got $8 billion worth of services exports. TPP is even more significant in our services trade than it is in our goods trade. The TPP countries take 47% of our services exports, again spread out across all of the major services export categories that we trade in. We already have agreements with a number of the TPP countries. Even with those, TPP adds value because it's a regional agreement and you can put the individual ones together. But TPP is our first FTA with a number of the countries. The other two major economies of the North America area, Canada and Mexico, and another one of our Pacific Rim neighbours, Peru. And you see there that for these new relationships that we get through TPP, nearly $9 billion worth of goods trade and over $3 billion worth of services trade, our first FTA relationship. So looking first at the goods side, TPP, 5 of our top 10 goods markets destinations. You see the shading there: Australia, United States, Japan, Singapore and Malaysia. And what did we get? This slide shows you, first column, our current trade, as in the exports for 2014 calendar year in each of those sectors to the other 11 TPP countries. Second column shows what duties, what tariffs those countries are currently able to collect on that level of trade. So, fisheries sector, $350 million worth of exports, $9 million worth of duties on that. Last column shows the duties that the TPP countries will be able to collect on those exports of originating goods once the TPP is fully implemented. So for fisheries, 0. In other words, all the tariffs are removed on our fisheries exports under TPP. Our objective was to get rid of tariffs on all of our exports. Ultimately, we weren't successful in that. We still face under TPP tariffs on beef into Japan. For beef into Japan, the current tariff rate that we pay is 38.5%. The Australians already have their own bilateral deal with Japan, and under that bilateral deal, the tariff that the Australian exporters has to pay is going down from 38.5% down to 19%. It's already below 30%. So Australia, as of today, they have an advantage against our beef exporters into Japan. When their agreement is fully enforced, 19%, we're paying 38.5%. How much beef do you think we're going to sell into Japan against that price disadvantage? Under TPP, not only do we catch up with the Australians, but together, because a number of countries sitting around the table, we managed to get that tariff in Japan down even further to 9%, which is the lowest tariff that Japan has ever agreed to on beef with anybody. And our beef exporters are very excited about that, and that explains, that tariff reduction in Japan explains a lot of the $80 million worth of tariff savings that will accrue to the beef sector in New Zealand. The United States has also accounted for quite a bit of that. The other area where we didn't manage to get tariffs off completely was in dairy. There, we did manage to get some new quota access, which is quantities that you can send in with lower or eliminated tariffs inside the quota. Altogether, across the major markets, those quotas are worth, at the current world dairy prices, which as you know are lower than we want to see, they're worth around $300 million worth of new preference trade into those markets. And over the 15 years, those quotas grow to nearly $700 million worth of tariff-free or tariff-reduced access into those markets. But we did actually manage to get rid of some tariffs in the dairy sector as well. Japan will eliminate tariffs on most cheeses. For our largest cheese trade line into the United States, we're going to get rid of the tariffs on that. And for some value-added products, like infant formula into the United States, Mexico and Canada, major markets for those products, tariffs will disappear on that too, which provides some interesting value-add product opportunities for our dairy companies to look to move up the value chain. And there again, you'll see almost $100 million worth of tariff savings on current dairy trade under the deal. Everywhere else, tariffs disappear. In total, a saving that TPP countries cannot levy of over $270 million worth of tariffs for our exporters. That's obviously spread around the country and spread across a number of products, but across the Nelson-Marlborough region, looking at the share of production here in the primary sectors, that's equivalent of roughly $17 million a year that foreign governments will not be able to take off exporters of their products of primary production. Services. Services are a growing part of our overall trade. They're up to nearly 30% of our total exports now, so services is also a very important part of these types of agreements. TPP, also five of our top 10 services destinations. Again, Australia, but also the United States, Japan, Singapore and Canada. And with it being our first FTA with some of these major markets, we have new services opportunities coming out of that. Either new market openings or greater certainty for our services exporters into these key markets. Again, across a number of the areas which are of export focus for our services providers, such as education, tourism, such as services related to our agriculture expertise. Up in the top corner there, you see this category called global supply chain related services, which sounds a bit jargony. What's that? That's all about is about how businesses actually do business these days. These days, a lot of producers of goods aren't just making their widget, sending it off and forgetting about it. They're looking to provide services alongside that widget, whether it's after-sales service, whether it's distribution and marketing, looking to get closer to the customer and extract more value for themselves from that product vis-a-vis the final customer. So there's important commitments on services related to that type of activity. But for that type of activity, particularly that latter part, if you're looking to get into marketing and distribution and closer to the customer, you actually often have to get into the offshore market, and that's where investment comes in. TPP countries are even more significant for New Zealand in investment than they are in our goods and services exports. 75% of our inward investment, the money that comes in, the productive capital that comes in to grow our economy, is coming from around the TPP table. The vast bulk from Australia, but also significant amounts from the United States, Singapore, Japan and Canada. But it's not just coming in that counts. As I said, our firms need to, if they're looking to move up the value chain, they need to be taking investment positions in offshore markets. And again, the TPP countries are where the bulk of our companies are making their offshore investments, over 70% again. Also heavily dominated to Australia, but again, significant investment into the United States and also into Singapore. So what are the outcomes in the investment area? Again, because it's the first agreement that we have with the major economies, United States, Japan, Canada and Mexico, we have for the first time commitments for our investors going into those markets. But when you're doing a negotiation, when you're doing a deal, it's a two-way thing. So those countries, as you see, sending investment into here, they want to get commitments from New Zealand on investment as well. So they were asking us for commitments around New Zealand's investment regime. Our investment regime has two parts to it. One is what's called the significant business assets part of the regime. That's if an offshore company is wanting to come in and buy a business in the middle of town here, in the middle of Christchurch, Wellington, our major cities. And at the moment, other than for Australia, the other countries, so Japan, United States, If they're wanting to make an investment of more than $100 million, it goes through the screening process of the investment office, and they have to demonstrate some sort of net benefit test for that. Under TPP, that amount will double from 100 to 200. So if someone from Japan is coming in and wanting to make an investment of $150 million in the middle of Auckland, say, they'll be able to do that without going through that net benefit screening test. But the bulk of our investment is already coming from Australia, and under CER we already have a screening threshold with Australia of close to $500 million. So the other TPP countries get some advantage, but not as much as we already have with the major source of investment coming in, Australia. The other part of our investment regime is the part that's called sensitive. And it's to do with sensitive land. It's not called sensitive for nothing. It's because that's where the sensitivities are around land purchases, rural land purchases. So that's where our policy has got the most apparatus to screen those purchases. And under that approach, any investment, no matter what the money size of it is, any investment looking to purchase more than 5 hectares of rural land goes through that screening process. That's what happens now. That's exactly what will happen under TPP. TPP does not change our screening of the sensitive land category at all. The category remains there to be screened, and the criteria that the screening goes against remain for us to change as we wish. So a future government can keep those criteria as they are now. A future government can make them more liberal, so it's easier for someone to invest in that land. Or a future government can make those criteria more difficult, make a higher hurdle for the foreign investor to jump over before it can invest in that rural land. TPP does not change our ability to do that. The other part of the investment area is a part of the agreement that's attracted a lot of comments and questions. We have these mechanisms in these agreements, and TPP is not the first. We have this in our agreement with China. We have it with our agreement with Korea. We have it with our agreement with all of the ASEAN countries. We have this mechanism in there so that our offshore investors have some degree of protection if they get faced by inappropriate action by a foreign government. Any of you who are running businesses will know that the only thing that's harder to run a business in your own country is to try and run a business in another one. So this mechanism provides some important protection against our companies being treated in an inappropriate manner by foreign governments when they're putting their capital at risk there. But on the other side, we want to ensure that our government is not going to be prevented through this mechanism from regulating in important policy areas in the public interest. And none of the TPP governments want to be prevented from doing that. So the mechanism contains a whole lot of safeguards in there to ensure that governments can continue to regulate without being successfully overturned through this investor-state mechanism. One of the safeguards which is new in TPP is on the tobacco control. Things like our plain packaging regime. So under TPP, a government will be able to choose to say, no, a tobacco company cannot take an investor-state action against a tobacco control measure. And our government has already said that it will invoke that provision. So under TPP, there will be no challenge from investor-state challenge from an investor from a TPP country on any tobacco control measure in New Zealand. But that's just one of the safeguards. There are a whole lot of safeguards in a whole range of public policy regulation areas, such as you see listed out there. There are safeguards against investors taking frivolous actions. Governments can have them ruled out early in the process. A lot of criticism that these investment tribunals are somehow secret tribunals. Under TPP, no, they're not. They are open processes which will be available for people to see and also to make submissions to if they feel strongly about a particular issue. And the other point to note here, given the makeup of the people around the table, is that with 75% of the investment we're getting from the TPP countries coming from Australia, we will not have the ISDS mechanism applying between Australia and New Zealand. We don't have it now because we recognise each other's legal systems. That doesn't change under TPP. Other areas which are of major economic interest for our exporters and of goods and services. Government procurement. Government procurement comprises quite a significant part of economic activity in most countries. We are a member of the Government Procurement Agreement in Geneva, which has the widest coverage of government procurement. But not all of the TPP countries are actually members of that. As you see, Malaysia, Mexico, Peru and Vietnam are not members of that agreement in Geneva. So through the government procurement system in TPP, we don't have to do anything new at all, but we get new commitments from Mexico, Malaysia, Peru and Vietnam. New opportunities for our exporters to sell into government contracts in those markets. The government procurement commitments at present apply only at the central government level, so there are no commitments in respect of local government procurement under TPP. There is a future discussion about that 3 years after entry into force, but absent agreement from the local bodies, whoever they may be, there are no local government procurement commitments under TPP. Similarly, state-owned enterprises. Why is TPP looking at state-owned enterprises? Well, a number of countries, some around the TPP table, some elsewhere in the world, are starting to use their own companies to skew the playing field, to advantage their own government-owned companies in competition against private sector operators. We don't do that here in New Zealand, and under TPP that's the type of regime that we're looking to set up across the board. So if a government owns an enterprise and it's engaged in commercial activity, not public policy activity, but commercial activity, it should be playing on a level playing field with private sector competitors. That's the TPP regime. Again, only central government enterprises, not local body enterprises. Further look at that 5 years down the track, but at the moment just government, central government enterprises. Also, only big ones. So to be caught by the framework here, an enterprise has to be generating more than $400 million worth of revenue a year. We have some of those, but the TPP regime is consistent with the way we run our state-owned enterprises anyway. IP is probably the other most controversial part of the agreement, and certainly the most complex part of the agreement. And the part of the agreement that New Zealand will have to change a few of the things, the way we do things. One of the key areas where we will need to change is we will need to increase our copyright term. We currently have life plus 50 years protection. Under TPP, we will need to have life plus 70 years. That's one of the areas, that's the area of the most significant cost for New Zealand, economic cost under this agreement. The estimate, which a number of people have challenged as being too high, but we're sticking with it, is that the cost, the long-term cost for that move in copyright will be around about $50 to $55 million per year in the long term. And we're talking about 20 years down the track before we hit that full amount. The second column there is where we were concerned that there could be other significant cost coming into our health system from provisions on patents for pharmaceuticals. So we fought very hard in the negotiation, as did others, to try and avoid that situation. We certainly want there to be reasonable standards of IP protection right around the region. We're looking for common standards. But we want those standards to be able to be implemented in a flexible way, because not every TPP country is the same. And as a result of the outcome of the negotiation, that's where we think we have landed on the pharmaceutical patent protections. So there will be some minimal costs there into our health budget, as you see, estimate of, on average, $1 million a year through longer patent terms. But very minor costs compared with the overall budget, and also compared with some of the proposals that we were faced with in the early stages of the negotiation. I'll come back to the point about UPOV a little later on. The other important part of the negotiation impinging on our health system was around pharmac. You might remember that the government was, during the negotiation, very clear in its public messaging that the government was not prepared to trade away in a trade negotiation like TPP the fundamentals of our health system, including the fundamentals of the way pharmac operated. That was the public statement that the government made, and that was the instruction that we as negotiators had to defend that position inside the negotiation. And fortunately, again, with a lot of hard work, we were successful in doing that. So, pharmac, there will be some new procedures that they put in place to do some transparency, due process, and some potential reviews of their decisions. That system will cost them about $4.5 million, they estimate, to set up, and around about $2 million or so a year to run. But the fundamentals of the way they run their operation to subsidise medicines into the New Zealand market do not change under TPP. When we do these agreements, we also look to do provisions in some other areas, particularly labour and environment. And what we're looking to do there is to try and ensure that the two systems of international commitments and domestic policy are mutually supportive. So we want to ensure that our trade rules are not getting in the way of our ability to domestically protect our environment or our labour right provisions. On the other side, we're wanting to make sure that when other governments are regulating in the name of environment or labour, that they're doing so for genuine reasons and not just looking to put in place new disguised forms of protectionism. So that's the overall architecture of these parts of the agreement. These two chapters are the strongest chapters, strongest provisions on labour and environment that New Zealand has included in one of our FTAs. And they also include some really new exciting provisions, such as you see there in the area of fish subsidies. New Zealand has been concerned for many years now that other countries chuck bucket loads of cash at their fishing fleets. They go out and they catch far too many fish, particularly on the high seas, and they are unsustainably running down the fish stock. So we've been trying to lead a bit of an international crusade to get some disciplines on this. TPP is the first time that we have got anything in an international agreement on this. This will help the issue around the TPP region, but it's also a platform that we can look to build and leverage in our discussions with other countries going forward. So that's quite an exciting part of the overall agreement. These trade agreements are about creating opportunities for New Zealand businesses, for New Zealand exporters of goods and services, for New Zealand's investors. They are not about putting governments out of business in the business of being a government. So governments need to regulate for a whole range of public policy purposes. You see some of them listed up there, whether it be the environment, health and safety, security, national treasures. So all of these agreements TPP included, have exceptions which allow governments to continue to regulate in these areas without being interrupted by the normal rules of the trade agreement. One of the most important exceptions for Aotearoa New Zealand is the Treaty of Waitangi exception. Here, what we're looking to do is we're looking to ensure that the Crown can continue to meet its obligations under the Treaty of Waitangi, whatever they are determined to be over time, without getting interfered with by the other TPP governments around the table. So it's to preserve that domestic policy space for what is a domestic conversation in New Zealand. We have this exception in all of our FTAs since the Singapore Agreement. So this is an exception that only New Zealand has. It covers the whole of the agreement, and it's an exception which allows the government to continue to honour its obligations to Maori and Indigenous people under the Treaty of Waitangi. We have taken that exception from less than 0.5% of the global economy, and we have now managed in TPP to persuade 36% of the global economy to give us that policy space. We also have it with China and Korea, and some other countries that we have these free trade agreements with. Altogether, more than half our exports are now under agreements with this policy space. TPP lifts that to 70%. That is quite a remarkable achievement, as has just been recognised by the Waitangi Tribunal that's been looking at this question. Why ultimately are we doing these agreements? Why have they been done for many, many years now? It's to create economic opportunity for New Zealand and New Zealanders. We look to model what TPP would represent as additional economic opportunity. And these models, they're very complicated, and they nearly always underestimate the result. The reason they underestimate the result is because they can't capture the ingenuity and the innovation and entrepreneurship of business people. So business people generally achieve more than the computer model will say that will be achieved. But the computer model says that we will get quite significant gains from TPP. What that's saying is that wherever our GDP is in 2030, 15 years down the track, otherwise, with TPP it will be $2.7 billion, or roughly 1% higher than it otherwise would have been in that year. In 2029, it might not be $2.7 billion higher, it might only be $2.6 or $2.5 billion higher. So what happens is you get a boost to GDP over a long, long time as a result of the increased opportunities for trade and investment under these agreements. So in total, TPP, if it comes in force and New Zealand is part of it, will generate many billions of dollars for New Zealand in additional GDP. But at the moment, TPP is just a piece of paper. So those opportunities are a dream in someone's eye. All countries have signed this agreement. What that means is that's the end of the negotiation. That's the deal. They then take it back to their respective domestic processes to put it through those processes to see if they can get the approval to ratify the agreement. For that involves a number of steps here, the first of which is the parliamentary, what we call the parliamentary treaty-making process. That's where a select committee, the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Committee, it takes the text of the TPP and it takes the national interest assessment that we put together to explain the advantages and disadvantages, and then it takes a look at it. The FADC called for public submissions. It heard a whole lot of submissions from people, and it produced its report to the government last week. And that was an overall favourable report from the committee as a whole. But that's just the first stage. The key stage is the next stage, the implementing legislation. Most of TPP, most of the obligations in TPP we're already consistent with, but a few of them we have to change our laws to be consistent with what the agreement would require. So the government needs to be able to pass that legislation through Parliament, through all the stages of Parliament, ultimately with a majority vote, before New Zealand can become party to TPP. The government has introduced that legislation this week in Parliament. It will have its first reading later this week, and then it will go through the various stages, the committee stages, more submissions on the actual legislation itself, and finally through the various readings for it to become law. The Minister has said that he wants to be able to secure that before the end of the year. Only then will New Zealand be able to say we're ready to ratify this deal to become a part of it, should it enter into force. It can enter into force in one of two ways. Either all 12 who sat around the table negotiating it can start at the same time. So there's up to 2 years allowed from the date of signature for that to happen. But if not everybody is quick enough, the people who are already there don't want to have to wait to enjoy those benefits. So TPP can get put into force with only 6 of the 12 countries around the table. It has to include both the United States and Japan because they're the biggest, so without them it's not going to go ahead at all. But if the United States, Japan and 4 other countries are ready, TPP will start irrespective of whether New Zealand is a part of it or not. If it starts, and we're looking to come along late, it's a bit like we're here in this room today, we're sitting inside the room, door's closed over there, have to knock on the door and say, please, can I come in? And at that point, that's the point that we would not want to be in because we've been driving this from the start. It's very important to be in that room at that first conversation for getting the benefits amongst the parties that we have now, and also for as the agreement expands beyond to the new countries that we hope will join it in the future. That is what I was looking to run through this morning in terms of the main features. There is a whole lot more information, the whole text of the agreement, the NIA, the electronic versions of some of the material at the back, and a whole lot of other online tools to navigate through the agreement, which you can find at that address there. I'll look forward to discussion and questions after the morning tea break.
Madam, there's going to be time for questions. No, there's going to be time for questions after morning tea. No, actually, I think what we...
Please don't be like that, okay?
No, we've got an hour for questions, right? We've got an hour for questions.
10:30 morning tea?
Yeah, 10:30 morning tea, and you could come up to David and ask for the clarification morning tea because he's going to be here. But we've got a specific time for questions.
Okay.
We've got a specific time for questions.
I'll take the one clarification.
Thank you. As an expert, the figure that you came up with for the GDP, could you just explain that is dependent on us winning new markets, but is that correct with all of our new countries that we have deals with? If we conversely lose markets to our competitors, could we have a loss in GDP of that same amount?
No, not a loss of that same amount.
So we won't lose any of our anything to anybody else.
The opportunities are showing what happens as a result of the markets opening up and New Zealand taking advantage of those opportunities. Our exporters competing in and expanding their trade in those markets. That's right. As New Zealand exporters have a very proud track record of doing under all of our agreements to date. But I can talk some more about that modelling after the morning tea break, if you like.
All right. As I said, this is the 6th of the roadshows. There's also been a series of hui that have been conducted around the country and will continue to be conducted. And part of coming out to places like Nelson is the fact that, as David said, this agreement is just a piece of paper until New Zealand businesses and New Zealand communities, business people and corporations take advantage of the opportunity, and all it is a written opportunity that it might offer. One of the groups here in Nelson, an important part of this community is Wakatu Incorporation, and Paul Morgan from Wakatu is with us now. And I wondered, Paul, if we could ask you for just 5 minutes, some observations, your observations and Wakatu's feeling about the TPP. If you could come forward. Thank you.
Kia ora no tātou. Fellow community members, it's good to stand here and talk about the TPP. It's been an agenda item within our community for quite some time, and as the chairman of Wakatu Incorporation and the owner of Kono New Zealand, we're a large exporter operating in the top of the South Island. To try and keep it simple, we've been asking ourselves the question whether we are pro-trade and whether it's a good deal, to keep it simple. Clearly, we are exporters as an organisation. We're involved in most of the bigger export industries of the region. We employ 500 people. We sell to 50 countries around the world, including 10 of the 12 in the TPP. So, you know, we're actively doing that at this point in time. The reason why we export, of course, is that we're a small country. We've got 4.5 million potential consumers, and it's just far too small for New Zealand to operate as a country. And on that basis, we have, 6 years ago, we invested in China. We have an office in Shanghai and local employees who obviously understand the culture and speak the language. And through that process, we've been able to engage with the China market. Now, on whether we're pro-trade or not, that's very, very clear. Whilst I haven't confirmed it with my board, Wakatu Incorporation, we're 100% for trade. However, whether it's a good deal or not is another matter. And we're going through a process of taking in the information from the government. We'll participate in the select committee process. There are a lot of people out there who are purportedly experts who have a contrary view to the government, and you know they're in academia and law and economics. There's a whole lot of people that, for one reason or other, they are not supportive of the TPPA. For us, we have to work through the process because I will be responsible for communicating with my 4,000 family members. They are shareholders. They are family members, however, and they'll tell me very clearly whether or not they agree with my and the board's position. And we've most recently had our first meeting and discussed this at a owners' meeting in Wellington, where we had a very large gathering to discuss the many issues that are before organisations like ourselves. There's time, obviously, in this process to have input, and there is areas of concern for us, and the real fundamental areas of concern are in regard to the government of the day's control and ability to legislate, regulate, and control areas of the environment, natural resources, the intellectual property arrangements, the issue about, particularly about labour, because there's a lot of labour comes into New Zealand. As an exporter, I employ a lot of foreign labour. So there's a whole lot of arrangements in business that are international in their approach. So we will continue to assess that, and the particular area for the Māori community is around, obviously, the treaty clause, which has been spoken to, and that is, you know, it is quite unique. There's no other country that has got that provision, and that really is a reflection on the fact that those countries have not got genuine Indigenous arrangements with their First Nations people. And it's a good reflection on New Zealand, albeit we've got a long way to go. But that's fine, it's a work in progress. The area of concern for us is around actually Indigenous intellectual property rights. It's around the area, and the government under this arrangement will have to do a lot of work because they really haven't started the work, and that's in the protection of our flora and fauna. The ability for these participating nations to take our intellectual property in this area and effectively take it out of the country, which is a concern to our community and should be a concern to us all, because in this space, particularly the medical, pharma, natural medicine space, the biodiversity of New Zealand is unique, as many of you understand, and that uniqueness creates opportunity. And we've got a long way to go in protecting that estate. So all in all, I'll be debating where we're at with this with my board. We've got to come to a view. We understand as an organisation we have a responsibility to have an informed view, because our view will be heard by the public, and it will certainly be heard by Māori New Zealanders all over New Zealand, because they know who we are and they respect our views and our opinions. So I can't say to you now that, I can clearly say to you now that we're traders and we will continue to export, and we're in these countries. The area, whether it's a good deal, on the balance, it's progressing really well. It's what it is. And I think what's not quite clear, David, is America and Japan, they have ability to change it through side letters. So it's still not quite clear what the final deal will be. And we're like all good businesses that manage risks. We don't generally support anything until we can see the final ink on the paper and what we all as a country are committing to. It's a big responsibility for this government and for the negotiators. And I acknowledge David, because I've been involved through their work over many years in the free trade agreements, and had the opportunity to be in China when we signed the FTA. That's been big for New Zealand. The financial assumptions, just for you all, they're there, and evidence is showing we've picked the gains up through the FTAs, but they're only there if you go out and get it and you don't give it away. And when I say give it away, if we get a tariff is reduced, the other party can take that back and discount their pricing, or you can hold on to it in a good commercial negotiation, and it will benefit your company and your country. So, kia ora no tātou.
Paul, thank you for that. As I said, after morning tea, we'll have, we might even be able to extend it. I'd hope to think that every question in the room is going to be answered, or at least get the chance to be put. So that will be about 5 to 11, I think we'll resume, and I'll indicate that you have the floor. It'd be nice if you introduced yourself to the group and ask your question. A trend has emerged in the past six roadshows, and that is that often those questions are prefaced sometimes with very, very long statements. Could I ask you to curb your enthusiasm and get to the question within a reasonable time frame, so that we can get through all the questions that might be posed today, and that we keep this a relaxed and friendly environment for people to ask their questions and listen, get a chance to listen to the answers. All right, so the microphone is there, it is open, and you can go for it. All right.
My name's Graham O'Brien. Just to cut to it, can you tell us what the negatives are?
If that's working. Nope. Does that work?
Yeah, that's it.
Is that on? Okay. Yeah. All right. There's that thing that I was talking about before, the national interest assessment goes through very detailed, part by part, assessment of the outcomes of the negotiation and the advantages and disadvantages of those as we can assess them. On the cost side, there are a few components that add up. The main one is the copyright one, the $55 million a year, as I was saying, in the long term. Just as the other governments can't levy tariffs on our products of export, we have to take our tariffs off on the imports we bring from those countries. Our tariffs are much lower on average than theirs are. We're already very open, so we get 270 off from them. The government here will have to take off tariffs which are delivering currently $20 million worth a year in tariff revenue. So that's another cost on the fiscal cost. Those areas on the pharmaceuticals, the $2.2 million worth of costs for the Farm Act procedures, the $1 million on average costs for the patent term extension on the pharmaceuticals, plus a couple of other minor administrative costs for actually running the system of the agreement in the future. All in all, estimated to be around about $80 million a year in costs. Those are the quantifiable costs that we identified through that analysis. But across the board, there aren't that many, because New Zealand is already running, by and large, an open economy and a regulatory system that accords with the types of approaches that you find in an agreement such as TPP.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, you're talking about the monetary costs. How about the costs, the social costs, and the cost to the sovereignty and the democracy of the country of signing up to tribunals that have no rights of appeal or precedence? And I mean, from what I believe, they wouldn't even be lawful in our own domestic law, courts. I mean, this is the main issue for a lot of people, is that it's the sovereignty and the democracy, that we'll have courts that are in another country ruled by another people for their own people's benefits and not ours.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there. These agreements, whatever the subject is, they're agreements that countries are doing with each other. So they are, in a sense, an international contract between the sovereign parties. They're a sharing of that sovereignty for a common purpose. So the governments are agreeing what they will do together, and they're agreeing what they won't do to each other. And that's the case in whatever sort of agreement you're talking about, whether it's an agreement on human rights, on climate change, anything like that. Every agreement like this involves a collective exercise of sovereignty. You're not giving away your sovereignty, because ultimately New Zealand flag's still flying above Parliament, and Parliament's where New Zealand makes its laws, nowhere else. And that doesn't change. But you are, as I said, agreeing certain things that you look to do with each other, certain things you look not to do against each other. On these FTAs, there is, in addition, this investor state mechanism. As I was saying, it's there from our perspective, the particular purpose of providing opportunities for our investors offshore, should offshore governments be acting in inappropriate ways against those investors. But we are looking to make sure that it's not interrupting the way that we do business here. That's why all those safeguards are in there. We've had this mechanism in one or other types of agreements for about 25 years now. We've got it in all of our modern trade agreements, the one with China, the one with Korea, and the one with all of the ASEAN countries. It hasn't been used against us under any of those agreements. And one of the reasons we think why it hasn't been used against us is because our governments, plural, tend to behave in ways that aren't deemed inappropriate under this sort of mechanism. So they treat people with due process, and they regulate pretty soundly. We also have a sound judiciary system. So if a commercial operator finds that it is getting treated, it thinks, harshly by a government, it can go to the domestic court and take action against the government, and some companies do. So for both those reasons, coupled with all the safeguards that are sitting there, we think that the balance of risk and opportunity is that it's safe, it's providing an opportunity for our companies abroad, while we have balanced off to a very high degree the risk point that Paul Morgan was talking about before in terms of what the government is doing here domestically.
But there you've ignored the numerous examples around the world that have already happened, and also that they don't take it to domestic courts, they go straight to these tribunals that are in fact biased and have been shown to be. So in fact, there's no way I think myself and many people I know can agree with these courts, and that they're outside of our country. They're not a human rights court, they're a corporate court, and they're biased towards the corporations. So I'd finish and just say, we can't agree with that sort of court, and we never will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I just ask you a question of that? You said New Zealand has never, under a similar setup, ever had a case taken against it, right?
Sure.
And so if we look at that, and it is controversial, the investor dispute resolution process, internationally, how often are those courts used, or have they been used, those types of arrangements?
There's quite a few cases that have occurred internationally. The UNCTAD, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, it monitors international investment things, including these types of actions. And there are many hundreds of actions that have been taken historically under these agreements. A number of those actions have occurred under the older type of agreements, which don't have a lot of the safeguards that are there in the more modern ones. Particular, some of the early cases under the NAFTA went in a direction that none of those governments wanted to see that mechanism being used for. So they actually wrote in an additional safeguard to make sure that those tribunals weren't doing that in the future. And that safeguard we have picked up into our other agreements, and it's also in this one. In terms of how democratic or otherwise they are, there are various different ways that people think of doing this. The European Union, for example, is looking at maybe doing something different and setting up a permanent standing court, which would have a standing bench, and which would therefore follow its own precedents because they'd be the same people. So, that's something we've said we'll look at that type of thing because we want to have an agreement with the Europeans as well. So we're prepared to look at various types of mechanisms. We're not wedded to any one mechanism. If you have something like that, then it becomes really, really important that you choose the people on that permanent bench pretty damn carefully, because you're going to be stuck with them. Under the system that we've got in TPP, it's a case-by-case tribunal. And if a case arises, the investor gets to pick one of the arbitrators, the government gets to pick another one, and then together, the two of them, the government and the investor, choose the third one to be the chair. And if they can't agree on that chair, they refer it off to an international standing body that has expertise in these types of things to determine who that chair is. So, every system has its checks and balances, but this one, because of the risks that exist with this mechanism, because this extends our coverage of this mechanism across some big new players. We and the other governments around the table took a really careful approach to the design of it to try and mitigate that risk as much as we could while still retaining a meaningful mechanism for our own investors offshore.
Could I ask David too, would that tribunal, and you've said New Zealand's never under similar setups had a case taken against it, could such a tribunal, if it finds against New Zealand, demand or instruct a domestic law change in New Zealand by way of penalty?
These tribunals are typically looking for, the investors typically looking for compensation and recovery of what it would see as lost property or lost enjoyments of its property. So it's not about law changes, it's just about some compensation for what the government has done to change the law.
Okay, so these tribunals can't say your law must say this?
No.
Okay. More questions, Madam?
A good moment maybe to follow up on the issue of the areas of safeguard against the ISDS. And my particular worry is that when we do move into a national action plan on climate change, and it will require legislation of some kind. For example, if a New Zealand government decided to institute a carbon charge at source, for example, could that sort of thing be challenged by a foreign corporation in an ISDS, or if we moved against, as a matter of public health policy, unhealthy foods that cause diabetes and so on, and there was legislation on that, could that be challenged by a foreign corporation in an ISDS?
So all of those types of general regulatory matters, provided a government is looking to do those types of regulation for a stated genuine policy purpose and they're doing it in a non-discriminatory way, we don't see that gives any grounds for a challenge under the investor state mechanism. The grounds for challenge that exist there is if you are treating an investor in a particularly arbitrary way, and it really has to be quite arbitrary, or if you're treating them in a particular discriminatory way where you're targeting that investor while you're letting others who are doing similar things off the hook. It's those types of things that give rise to the claims, not non-discriminatory public regulation of the type that you're talking about for environment or health and safety.
Well, that is reassuring, and reassurance is needed when you read some of the hundreds of cases of ISDS where public health policy or other environmental policy have been trashed by other ISDS mechanisms. So I hope that your reassurance is durable.
Yeah, and you have to look at each of these cases really carefully because they're fact specific. But our view is that general public regulation is not at risk under these mechanisms. As I was saying, the predominance of the cases are under the earlier type agreements. The UNCTAD monitors the way these things work, and of all of the cases that have been taken, there's only one case that has been taken under an agreement which has been signed since 2010. Now, people might say that that's because it's only recent agreement, but we could also say that the agreements that have been done since then, the safeguards have got a lot more government-friendly in them than some of the earlier agreements. So that also we would see as reducing the risk for against investors taking action of that sort.
Yep. Yes, you may. Yeah, that's right.
Will the stalled legislation on plain packaging for cigarettes go ahead now?
I understand that I'm not a politician, so I'm not privy to all of that, but I understand the government has said it's looking to move that legislation forward. And as I said, under TPP, there won't be any possibility for an investor to tackle a tobacco control measure like that.
Yep. If you just come forward to the microphone and take you out, if you want to line up, that's fine. I'll take a seat near it. Madam.
I'm Sandra Ware. I wonder, since the ISDS is such a concern to so many people, probably the overwhelming one if you're not involved in trade, would it be a good idea for you to make that, what you've just been talking about, more public and allay our fears?
Yeah, we certainly try to make these types of things public. So we've got information, the types of things that I've been talking about now are set out in that national interest assessment, and we've also got a short version of it, which is available at the back of the room there in one of those pamphlets, and it's also available for anybody to look at on our website. So we certainly try and get that information out as broadly as we can.
How about newspaper articles or news journalism or
that certainly.
Magazines, just generally, don't worry about ISDS, it's all fab. Okay.
We'll look to see how we can get the message out even further. It's a good idea.
And I guess that's why you're here today too, as well. Yeah. Madam.
Excuse me. All right. Yes, can you please explain to me in what way the NAFTA, which was sold to the world with the exact same words as the TPPA, how it differs to protect New Zealanders, because the results in Mexico have been that the middle income workers' wages were reduced by 14%, the lower income wages were reduced by 26%, and there was an alarming increase in obesity. In what way does the TPPA protect New Zealanders from these ramifications?
Well, I don't know what the relevant provisions are of NAFTA that you would think had contributed to those outcomes in Mexico, but the thing that protects...
It was subsequent to NAFTA being implemented.
The thing that protects New Zealand and New Zealanders against any particular impacts here in New Zealand is our domestic legal and regulatory framework. And TPP, apart from the particular areas of the legislation that need to be addressed and any associated regulations, TPP doesn't change our domestic regulatory framework at all, other than those particular areas that you'll see in the bill that's now before Parliament.
Thanks, David. And Sean, you might even agree with this, but I think that everybody would agree, if you really thought about it, that the best marketing move New Zealand could make in the history of New Zealand would be to pull out of this agreement. The whole world would turn their heads and look and think, why is this little country saying no to this really wonderfully shiny worded sales pitch dominated by American corporations? And we would get the attention and respect of the whole world, just like we did when we said no to apartheid, just like we did when we said no to nukes. And I think that would be the best thing that New Zealand could do, and we could start to turn ourselves into an organic country which could sell our products, and they would be at high demand, and we wouldn't need this trade agreement. So I would like everybody to think about saying no, giving us kudos on the world stage, and moving like Denmark is, towards making all of their products organic and not having to close the rivers like we have here in New Zealand. The first time in the history of New Zealand, we've had to close rivers down south for fishing for trout and salmon because they are so dirty, because we are so dead keen on exporting more low-quality milk powder overseas.
Okay, and I take it there's not a question there. I do want to ask a question in result to that.
Yeah, no, I'm asking, would you agree?
Not of you. Of David. David, this is a term that is often bandied about, that this agreement was somehow driven or negotiated by large American corporations or global corporations. Can you tell me, as someone who has been involved since day one, what input and place at the negotiating table did global corporates have?
Oh, don't roll your eyes like that,
No,
David.
excuse me, madam, I think you've had your statement. I'm just asking David a question because I wanted to clarify this. It's been said often. Can you tell me what role, if any, they had?
So,
It reads like a
could we
Bill of
listen
Rights.
to the answer, madam?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
so no corporation from any of the countries was ever at the TPP negotiating table. There were a number of stakeholder events during the course of the negotiation. When we were doing formal negotiating rounds, we also had structured stakeholder events, and those included corporates from many of the TPP countries, including New Zealand, and they included NGOs and civil society from many of the TPP countries, including New Zealand, but no corporate was ever at the negotiating table.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Gareth Edwards here. For a start, I looked up on YouTube to see if there were any previous road shows that I could view, and they weren't here. It might have been a good idea to video it. But on to my question, the investor states dispute mechanisms and what have you. Yeah, I think someone's mentioned in the past there wasn't so much information on what they what was allowed to, sorry, I'm having a bit of trouble putting this forward, but what could be challenged on them and what couldn't. You seem to have put forward the idea that if, sorry, feeling a bit nervous here.
Thank you, John.
Okay. That if it's contested, sorry, not used to public speaking.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe I'll ask you a bit later.
All right. Sure. Okay. If you want to come back, Gareth, no problems.
Sorry.
No problems at all, mate. Sit.
Thank you. Gary Clover, retired Methodist presbyter. I would like to ask, with regards to, well, recently all of our exporters of infant formula suddenly were thrown into disarray because the Chinese government threw in new regulations and processes that excluded the vast majority of those exporters. What's to stop any other country involved in TPPA doing that sort of arbitrary imposition of extra bureaucratic trade import procedures?
Yeah, it's a good question because these agreements set general architecture and rules, and they don't stop governments from continuing to regulate. Some regulations that a government might introduce we might not agree with, and if we don't agree with a regulation which is introduced, if we think it's being put in place as a barrier to trade, as a protectionist measure, then the architecture that we have in the agreement allows us to go and question that. We can go through various cooperative, consultative mechanisms on a regulation with the other government. And if we don't get satisfaction, we still don't agree with it, if we think it's a protectionist measure, there's a formal dispute, state-to-state dispute resolution under these agreements that we can look to take action of it. That particular one, that's with China, obviously not part of TPP, but we do have our own agreement with China. And China is also a member of the World Trade Organization. So we always look hard at something like that. But I think their stated purpose, if I remember rightly, and don't quote me on this because I wasn't following that particular one word for word, but I think what they were looking to do was to lift the general scale of the producers and traders in infant formula to a scale level where they thought that they would be having robust procedures around health and safety. That with too many little traders, there was too much of a chance of unsafe products slipping through the net, so they wanted to be only getting their product from large, registered, certified producers and exporters. That, I think, was the reason why they did that, which did knock hard against a lot of the little businesses which had sprung up looking to export a little bit from here.
Okay, Madam.
G'day, I'm Jean Gorman. The TPPA states, and I quote, "New Zealand reserves the right to adopt or maintain any measure with respect to water, including allocation, collection, treatment and distribution of drinking water. This reservation does not apply to the wholesale trade and retail of bottled mineral, aerated and natural water." Now, this specifically exempts the only use when water can be removed from the New Zealand public entirely, which in drought years, when water use is limited, is a point of great concern. If someone were to set up a bottling plant, for instance, upstream of our farm, our well would run dry. The TPPA allows the TDC or any other council to allocate water in a fair and equitable manner, but not prevent a commercial outfit from setting up a plant and bottling the lot. So is it correct that under TPPA, councils will be unable to regulate what can only be described as one of the most important resources on the planet?
That councils will be unable to regulate?
Is that
No, that's not correct. That's not correct.
But
Because of, as you said, the first part of that is all about water allocation. So the allocation of the water right in the first place continues to be regulated by our own regime as we see fit.
And so the second sentence, this reservation does not apply to the wholesale trade and retail of bottled water. Doesn't that cover that?
That's what that means is if you are trading in water, i.e. you've already got your permit to draw the water out, the trading activity is not covered by that reservation. So the trading activity is subject to the normal disciplines of non-discrimination.
I see. So allocation is... And a second question, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
I'm an olive grower. The New Zealand olive industry has had to struggle to establish itself in the face of unfair competition from imported North African corn oil labelled as extra virgin olive oil. It has been impossible to market New Zealand oil at a competitive price because there is no border testing and no country of origin labelling. It is well known that the mafia makes more money from doctoring cheap oil into olive oil than from its drug operations. It was the lead story in the New York Times magazine some years ago. And until the olive industry can establish itself, we can't get the volume to start exporting. The problem for the fledgling New Zealand olive industry is offshore entities can ship bulk oil as a commodity to Auckland, have it bottled in Penrose and label it as extra virgin olive oil bottled in New Zealand, which leads the unwary to assume it is New Zealand produce. This practice needs to stop if local producers are to be protected. Now, the government has previously argued that country of origin labelling is too difficult. The TPPA provides that each party shall provide certification of origin. I realise the mafia is not a TPPA signatory, but proper labelling and proper border checks would provide a much-needed boost to the New Zealand olive oil industry. So now country of origin certification is mandated for every shipment. Can we assume this will lead to proper country of origin labelling of olive oil in retail outlets?
There's a lot of complicated things in that question. In terms of the origin certification, that's a requirement for the purposes of obtaining preference under the agreement. So if someone wants to bring their product in and the normal tariff is, say, 10%, but they want to get the 0%, then they have to demonstrate that their product comes from the TPP country and therefore they should get the 0%. That's what that's about. But the point you were making earlier about something being mislabeled, corn oil is olive oil or something like that, that, as you say, is down to the enforcement of our domestic laws, our consumer protection laws, our truth in labelling, all of that. So if there are documented cases of something like that, what you or other concerned people should do is take it to the relevant agencies of government that police the consumer law, Ministry of Consumer Affairs or somewhere like that, and say, this is what's going on, this is the evidence we have, check it out, because they should not be able to do that.